Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's a Ukrainian show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and today's guest we have Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you, Sasha. Glad to be here as always.
Great to have you. And we have Ivan Kucherenko from Kyiv, Ukraine. Welcome to the show, Ivan.
Hello, Sasha. Hello, Jonathan. Nice to be here with you again.
Yes, of course, always. And do you have any movies that should watch?
Yeah, we can watch a movie about one famous Ukrainian unit, Kraken. You probably heard a lot about it, so we can discover even more from this movie.
Okay.
Піхотинець – це найважливіший елемент в цілому у війні. Ти можеш розбити усі хати FPV-дронами, стерти артилерію, але поки не зайде туди людина і не поставить стяг, це сіряк.
You heard about Kraken, the reconnaissance and sabotage special unit of the main intelligence directorate. Within this elite unit, there is a group of chosen ones. The most dangerous assaults and night operations are handled by the Special Assault Company.
Без мотивации лучше к нам тогда не идти. Здесь нужны яички. Не каждый станет штурмовиком. Ты смотришь в глаза смерти.
The Kraken Assault Company was born from a group of friends united by the football fan movement.
Все компания – это семья.
После первого штурма у нас у всех были автоматы, то есть там максимум у кого-то пару РПГ и все. И после первого штурма где-то нашлись пару пулеметов, а потом уже по чуть-чуть начался этот ленд-лиз и по чуть-чуть начали давать всем остальным.
Тобто, виходить, все, що ми тут бачимо, це...
Награблен.
Это в основном все трофейное. Это все трофейное.
In the end, friends with rifles grew into an elite assault company that carried out combat missions in Kyiv and Kharkiv regions.
Більшість бойових завдань, які ми виконуємо, вони являються закритими для більшої частини людей, але згодом всі дізнаються про те, що робить SA Company.
The extent to which SA Company has harmed the Russians is evidenced by one fact.
По нашим расположениям Искандер прилетел. Ни одной машины у нас не уцелело. Все здание разбитое. И они увидели, и до подвала добило Искандер. Такие вещи погорели. Очень неприятно.
The fact that SAC were friends from the very beginning has its impact.
У них на папері стрілки, а у нас це людське життя.
Снимали задачи, и нас, к сожалению, так сказать, спалила вражеская птичка, после чего нас начали безбожно крыть со всего, чего только можно. И авиация была, и минометы были, все было. Не знаю, где-то в пару метрах от меня, парни не дадут соврать, был прилет, и этот осколок залетел прямо в колено.
Саня вообще-то тяжелый парень у нас. Больше 100 килограмм.
Заметно, да, чуть-чуть.
Тянуть его, конечно, было. Тянули 4 километра.
На самом деле, вот так вот рассказать весь путь, это что блокбастер какой-то, боевик. Я начинаю как-то дружить с новой ногой, с этой шайтан машиной. Начинаю по чуть-чуть расхаживаться и, да, в планах вернуться. Где буду полезен? В идеале, конечно, хотелось бы в FPV.
Штурм такий, який він є, це про те, що думати головою. Ти повинен бути більш тренований за свого противника. В тебе тренування 2 рази в день, підготовка вогнева, тактична, медицина, фізична підготовка, відпочинок, тренування, виїзд на завдання, виконане завдання, повернення додому, відпочинок. І все знову.
Chicha himself lives by the same schedule.
Что касается у нас командира, у нас же не кричат «Вперед! Вперед!» У нас кричат «За мной!» Я не знаю, Чича вообще... Он с нами везде ходил, на все боевках он с нами был. Спал в одной кровати, ели с одной миски. Ну что мы можем сказать? Это...
Смелость может и погубить. Знаете, как говорится, что героев дают посмертно.
Наша задача не погибнуть, наша задача сделать задачу, которую нам
И
поставили.
выжить, да. И чтобы остальные жили.
The main mission of the Special Assault Company is clearly stated by its fighters.
Это утилизация пи***. У меня ненависть к ним вообще. Мне сейчас вот это еще Волчанск разбомбили. У меня там 2 квартиры. Ну это просто, я не знаю. Я столько труда туда вложил именно своего. А тут взяли, пришли какие-то разбомбили. Ну это вообще, я не знаю.
Освободитель.
Освободили от всего.
От работы, дядя.
От квартиры. Да. Украина — это наш дом,
Батьківщина.
который мы защищаем.
У меня сердце сине-желтое.
Я не хочу жить там под флагом России или Беларуси.
Коли ти заходиш, тебе хоче вбити усе, починаючи від дронів, артилерії, інших піхотинців, твого противника. Усе. Яка ще тут може бути мотивація? Вижити? Метафорично, хай це буде господарі в домі. А дім – це Харків. Якщо і хтось і буде тут господарювати, то Краків.
Нормально, брат.
That is very inspirational.
Yes, it is. And I cannot imagine that Russians have any close such motivation as these Ukrainian soldiers who are ready. And I wish there would be even more people like that, so they could start attacks more into actually Russian territory and do like commandos units and just do, say, drones are doing now terrific job.
Yes, I was going to mention, that the recent attack on Moscow
Yeah.
by drones. Now that could be proved to be as significant as the moment during World War II, you recall, during the Battle of Britain, when at a certain crucial moment, the British decided to do a night bombing of Berlin. They struck Berlin. It was symbolic damage in real terms, but it told the Germans that you are not safe in Berlin. You can be hit. And that apparently provoked Hitler enough to where he made a crucial decision to terror bomb London, to try and break the morale of the British people by heavily bombing London. And fortunately, that worked in favor of the British because it took attention away from the German campaign against the British Fighter Command, which was getting worn down. It was on the verge of having to pull back and retreat into the interior of the country to get away from the constant German attacks on Fighter Command, which were having their effect. But that fatal diversion took the pressure off the British, enabled Fighter Command to rebuild, and therefore it proved to be decisive in the Battle of Britain. This may prove to be a decisive element as well, now that the Ukrainians have demonstrated that even with drones, even if it's just drones at this point, it still is a visible attack. It has a visible effect on the morale of the Russian people, and it teaches them that, no, you are not safe from being retaliated against in this war.
I would like to tell everybody that yesterday I heard information from the trusted sources that I think UK is leading in that regards, but to formulate a new doctrine of Western countries, specifically NATO countries, that if Russia will continue to bombardments of Ukrainian cities, killing civilians, and continue this terror against infrastructure just as well, then there will be absolutely no restrictions on using any Western supplied weapons against Russia on the Russian territory anyway, what Ukraine will decide to do. I think that would be a very powerful message, because I can't believe how the whole world is looking at the daily huge crimes what Russian government, Russian army is committing against Ukraine and Ukrainian people, and this just cannot.
That's because Sasha. That's because that reality has not been made real to them. They are not personally. The Western allies are not personally experiencing those attacks, and therefore, they are somewhat more reluctant to escalate. However, the Ukrainians are doing the correct thing and making the war very real to Russia, right at the core of Russian support, which would be Moscow. And so if they can continue to do that, and if they can follow that up, as you and I have been discussing, if they can follow this up their Kursk offensive with yet another supplementary counteroffensive, say against the Crimea, which there are some signs that may well be occurring before the winter months occur, then this could prove to be very decisive and render tonight's debate somewhat irrelevant. Somewhat irrelevant. Although there will be a lot of people watching that one.
75 million.
Say again?
75 million people in just US.
Oh, in just US. There may be a significant foreign audience as well.
In Canada, there will be another probably 10-15 million for sure.
Are you sure are you telling me the whole population of the country is going to be watching?
Closer, yeah.
We know Canada is not known for its great numbers.
No, Canada's population is almost 40 million people, 40.
Okay.
It's not really such a tiny little country.
Yeah.
By size, okay. It's a huge country.
Yeah, that's okay. It's got lots of space to grow into.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
In Ukraine, also a lot of people will be watching debates because
yes.
It's an important subject for Ukrainian people who never been watching presidential campaign in any other countries before, like we're watching now, and especially when candidate Trump says that in terms of his victory, he will lift off sanctions from Russia and from Iran, when more and more sanctions actually should be put on Russia and Iran for continuing this war and supplying Russia with ballistic missiles.
Well, the good point about tonight's debate is that if there is a clearly decisive perceived victor in the debate, and that candidate gets a decisive boost towards re-election, what that does for Ukraine is that it does increase the predictability of what is going to occur. They can see, okay, this candidate is much more likely to win in November. That's becoming clear. We know we negotiate with that candidate or talk to that candidate and get a clear idea of that candidate's intentions. And then Ukraine can take that knowledge and plan appropriately for themselves. Okay, do we continue to play our cards very, very close to the vest? Do we continue, or do we throw that counteroffensive punch in one more attempt to further develop the situation in our favor for any potential negotiations or even an outright end to the war? So all of this is very important in the calculations of what Ukraine does next.
Actually, I would like to notice a very interesting thing, that Russians were saying that they haven't diverted any units from their attack on Pokrovsk and so on to Kursk, that Kursk is like secondary issue. They don't care much about Kursk, but they will concentrate all their efforts on Pokrovsk. And guess what? In the last few days, there was no movement. They haven't got even 1 single meter in their attack against Pokrovsk. So I'm wondering, did Ukraine brought extra defensive units to Pokrovsk?
I suspect so. They probably have calculated very carefully just how much additional force they need in order to bring Russia's Pokrovsk offensive to a halt. And that's timed very well because as the weather continues to worsen, as we continue to move towards the autumn and the start of winter, that is going to work in Ukraine's favor, especially particularly if Russia continues to try and push an offensive and if they cannot really react effectively to the Kursk incursion. So this is all developed. The elements are developing in Ukraine's favor. The Ukrainians simply have to continue to keep a very tight control of what they tell other people, especially their allies.
Jonathan, one thing I don't understand. If you remember the German strategy of blitzkrieg, if they had a resistance, let's say a small village or whatever, they wouldn't even bother to take this village. They would go around it.
Correct. They would go around it.
Yeah.
They would leave an infantry force to surround and reduce it, while the armored units continue to penetrate deeper into the territory.
Exactly. And I don't understand why Russians are not using the same strategy, for example.
Because they don't, well, for one thing, if you will recall, even in 1941 with the Blitzkrieg, the Germans, of the percentage of German units that were motorized were about 10%, and the rest were horse-drawn wagons that moving the logistics system. So the Germans couldn't really go that far or that fast without running into serious supply problems at the end of that. And the Russian situation was even worse. So their logistics system was almost wholly dependent upon horse-drawn wagons. And it was not until the Russians began receiving Ford trucks from the United States in Lend-Lease that the Russians began to develop and have some sort of indigenous logistical capability of their own. And even by 1945, they still did not have a great percentage of their logistics system moved by trucks. By contrast, in the U.S., when the U.S. invaded at Normandy, they didn't have any horse-drawn wagons. It was all motorized. And so when they had Operation Cobra and they broke out of the Normandy Peninsula and began their offensive across France, they were able to go a lot faster back across France than the Germans had back in 1940.
Jonathan, and you know why? Because in France, horses are very expensive. So Americans figured out that
the horses use the trucks. For God's sake.
Okay.
By the way, Russians used the same tactics in the beginning of their invasion, because they were also the main goal of their blitzkrieg was occupation of Kiev, and they were unable to take several major cities like Sumy, so they just passed it by and tried to move their main forces to Kiev, and that made a bad joke with them later, because Ukrainian forces began to counterattack, to cut the Russian logistic supply lines, because the distance was pretty high towards the Russian border, and they were not able to support their units advancing to Kiev because of this great distance and continuous counterattacks of Ukrainian forces. So they've tried to use the same tactics as Germans, but they're not successful.
They have neither the skill, nor the necessary supporting logistics to be able to,
training.
The training, they weren't trained to do it that way, and they just don't have the requisite equipment to do it that way.
Exactly.
And actually, they were not ready for the Ukrainian fighting.
Oh, yeah.
They considered that Ukrainians will just flew away when they see them on tanks riding
and it's their own fault
across the country.
It's their own fault for forgetting that, because they had obviously forgotten, or did not even know about really the resistance of the Ukrainians to Soviet occupation from 1945, when the Soviet army first entered Ukrainian territory, And that resistance continued was not fully put down until 1954. And that's with no outside support. For the Ukrainians successfully resisted and tied down Russian units, for years. And apparently, there was no historical memory of that experience within the current 21st century Russian armed forces. They completely disregarded those lessons learned. And if anybody did try to bring that up, they obviously probably disappeared.
I think if history teaches us anything, is while Ukraine was joining Lithuanian Polish Union and was part of the Western civilizations, Russians were crawling to the Mongols, Hans, to get rights for running this, whatever part of the country they were trying to get, and sometimes 2 or 3 different Russian tsars or leaders, or you want to call them, they were all together crawling to Mongols, asking for the right to rule, and they were intriguing against each other and sometimes were killing each other right there just to get right from Mongols. This is history of Russia, and the same thing is today. Putin is like a Mongols Han, ruling the country and doing everything what he wants. This is what Russia is today. Unfortunately, there are probably some people, my friends tell me, you're so harsh against Russians. There are some very good people there and very clever people there, or so on. I think that all good and clever people already run away from Russia. I don't think that whoever left there are worth even mentioning. Ivan, do you have another movie to show us?
Yeah, you actually mentioned before that Russia continues to bomb Ukrainian cities and kill civilians and bomb civilian infrastructure. I just wanted to add that now Russia is bombing not only Ukrainian cities, but Russian cities as well, because Suja is being occupied by Ukrainian forces, and Russians are bombing Suja because they don't have any other tactics like bombing
Does Russia
the cities.
believes that Suja is Ukrainian territory?
Their strategy is rather to ignore it, because they don't have enough forces to they occupy that region, and they're just ignoring this issue and trying to make a poker face and say that everything is okay, but Ukrainian operation in Suja continues, in Kursk region continues, and more territories being occupied by Ukrainian forces advancing. Now, as Commander Syrsky says, more than 1,300 kilometers are currently being conquered from Russia, which is just a great surprise for this great power. But the video I want to show you, second video, is not about it. It's about what Russians can do best of all, and why Ukraine needs your support. So let's watch it and just understand how regular week in Ukraine looks like. Mark, please play the video.
Mark.
Wake up, Mark. Wakey.
Anyway, I just wanted to mention what we just discussed is there is a great Russian saying, okay, I'll say it first in Russian, «Бей своих, пусть чужие боятся». It's about bombing their own cities. So what in English, it would sound like attack your own, so your enemies will be fearful of what you do with your own.
Okay.
Yeah, that's something strange. Actually, I was thinking about, I've read analysis of Russian economy and their relationship with Iran and China and what's happening there. Iran is now going ballistic against Russia, and they are already made announcement that they are not going to supply anymore their ballistic missiles. And what they're upset about it is that Russia, although it was friends with Armenia for so long, now they're siding with Azerbaijan, and they're making it coming from China. There is some railway, a new railway is being built, and it's being built the way that Iran will be completely of Armenia because they have common border, but because of the railway, there will be no more communications between Iran and Armenia. And Iran believes that Russia is trying to ostracize Iran and take side of Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan has its own problems with Iran. There are a lot of Azeris live in northern Iran, and so it goes back centuries, and so on. So. With China, there is another even bigger problem is that China stopped 100% any trade in yuan, which is the only currency trading on Moscow market. So there are no more foreign currency trading on Moscow market. It was just yuan left. There was no dollars, no euro, nothing. Yuan is, and 99.6% of all trades was ruble against yuan. Done. History. Finished. And also Russia owes to China $40 billion from previous trades, and China now asks politely to repay this $40 billion. And although for Russia, it shouldn't be such a great figure, but when you're fighting for almost 3 years, the war, 40 billion could be actually a large amount of money. So this is all shows how weak Russia really economically, how difficult for Russia is to continue this war. And by the way, a lot of correspondents now saying that the intensity of Russian attacks and bombardment against Ukraine is going down big way, because either there are not enough missiles, maybe there is not enough even bullets, and probably that all being reflected in the intensity.
And all of this is going to, all of that lack of intensity is going to be magnified by the oncoming autumn weather, as it's going to further impede any Russian offensives into Ukraine. As if it's not already brought to complete halt, it's going to give Ukraine an opportunity to strike before in the near to intermediate future, before winter, pretty much brings everything to a halt.
So things are not looking rosy with Iran and China, because before I thought that Russia would ask for a lend-lease from Iran, China, maybe some North Korea or so on, but it's highly unlikely this time.
They don't have the resources to spare.
No.
Yeah, I think we can start the video now.
Yes,
so,
please.
Okay. Mark's awake. Great.
God. Yes, obviously, Ukraine needs a lot of the air defense systems, but also it needs finally permission to strike with every possible weapon to the Russian territory, air bases, the, for example, depositories of weapons and ammunitions. And that's being done by drones, actually, quite successfully for some time. But with the long-range missiles, it will be even more effective, because when you combine attacks with long or medium-range missiles with drones at the same targets, I think that what would work quite well. What
Oh,
do you
yes.
think?
Yeah, because the Russians clearly do not have the same quality of ballistic missile defense and air defense that the West has been able to supply qualitatively to Ukraine. And if we can develop this effective shield over Ukrainian territory and reinforce that and help preserve Ukrainian territory and infrastructure, then the effects of Ukrainian missile attacks, particularly with I am anxious to see Polynitsa being used effectively, and seeing where they are going to strike with Polynitsa in order to have its most decisive effect. And if I were just as a bit of gratuitous advice, if I were sitting there with the Ukrainian command, I said, use Polynitsa against Moscow. Yeah, just hit Moscow with Polynitsa. Give them a nice early Christmas present.
Romansk, actually, it's a little town not far from Moscow. I was there, probably 15 years ago or so on. It's close to Zhukovsky, which is a military air base, also near Moscow. Also, it's airport. Bykovo is right there. And the distance from Romansk to the center of Moscow is about probably 50 kilometers. So it's not too far, and they could unleash their weapons against Romansk. There's no reason why they can hit closer to Moscow, and the great targets would be actually all these areas, Zhukovka and some other areas where all these Russian oligarchs are residing. So, but okay, it's probably a matter of time, and probably Ukrainians by now they're augmenting their arsenal and bringing more and more weapons, because weapons are arriving from the West. It's not that it's not arriving anymore. It keeps arriving. Nobody now not talking about where they're arriving, how many missiles arriving, and so on. Now it's all being concealed, but they are arriving, and this is by far the best news for us. And with that, I would like to thank you very much, both of you, for today's program. And I really hope to see you Friday, same place, same time, and I'm expecting even better news by Friday. Thank you very much, and Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.